I don't generally cover games that get mainstream success, but there's exceptions to almost every rule. I've been playing city builders most of my life. I remember playing SimCity and Pharaoh back in the day when I was a little kid, as well as many tycoon games such as Chris Sawyer's Transport Tycoon and Roller Coaster Tycoon. Managing, maintaining, upkeeping, and making the populations rise has been a portion of the games I've played for just about all of my life. And in the mid-2000s, at least from my perspective, where I grew up, it was very difficult to find city builders. Not a lot of them really existed. This got even worse with the release of SimCity 2013. The genre was all but gone from my perspective. Certainly franchises like Anno still existed, but that never quite did it for me. When I finally was introduced to the Anno games, I've always found myself bouncing off them. They're a bit too factory-like for me and not enough city-like, if that makes any sense. It's like the concept of a city being compressed down to its bare minimum mechanics instead of just allowing yourself to build a sprawling town or city. But fortunately, Steam Greenlight existed. And on Steam Greenlight, published by and developed by Shining Rock Software LLC, a little video game called Banished came into existence. Admittedly, Banished was a game I bounced off of quite quickly. It was a game I figured out the formula for and got tired of. But it was a game that changed a lot of things for me about the city building genre. There were city building-ish games in the past, like Stronghold, which had an adversary, as well as games like Pharaoh, which had some form of combat, and I'm going to do that in invisible air quotes. But Banished had the force of nature against you. Disease, fire, wind. And at least for me, this was the birth of my experience with the survival city builder as a genre. Banished, for its time, was a runaway success. Of course, compared to many other extraordinarily successful indie games, it kind of seems dwarfed by comparison. But Banished is a very important game for the city builder genre. To the point where, when describing a new city builder, you describe it based on how close it is to playing Banished. Banished laid the groundwork for all future city builders in the indie space, or at least the low-budget games space. Shortly thereafter, the release of the original City Skylines reminded everybody that yes, we do want modern city builders, and yes, you should continue developing them. Banished, but it's the apocalypse. Banished, but it's the other apocalypse and buggy. Banished, but it's in this weird diesel punk future with trains. And some have even tried to be Banished, but with combat. But none of them really quite nailed it. They either were lacking in some way, or excelled in completely different ways, making them stand on their own. But that brings us to the main topic of this video. Manor Lords. Manor Lords is a largely solo-designed and developed game that released on the 26th of April, 2024. Published by Hooded Horse, the solo developer, with a number of contractors, released the game into early access for the price of $40 US, your regional equivalent. I was lucky enough to receive a review key for the game a couple days early. I've also had access to a few beta builds from the last year or so. It's very rare that I get this excited about a city builder, because there are so many of them these days, to the point where I can't even keep up with them. While it is one of my favorite genres, I've learned to just kind of look and go, okay, well, I've played a game that's done very similar things to that, and I would just go play that instead. And that, honestly, has been how I've felt about a lot of the releases over the past few years. Regardless of how compelling or not compelling they ended up being, I always just found myself bouncing off. But Manor Lords does something different. Manor Lords has a focus on historical accuracy that I find quite fascinating, but also a lot of very gamey elements that make it feel like a very fun little toy to play with. But let's start off with the obvious. Manor Lords is absolutely gorgeous. It is a game that allows you to walk around in a third-person perspective as some dude with a cape, but it also lets you pan out and see your whole town. You can see the entire landscape that you have the ability to build on and move across the overworld with ease. Simply scrolling out and moving the camera across the map and scrolling back in is extremely satisfying and feels really good to control. The game has outstanding modern visuals and runs quite well on most PCs. Assuming your PC fits the minimum requirements, because they are a little bit on the steep side. That being said, if you do have at least 8 gigabytes of RAM and a 1050, you're probably good to go. My only issues with the visuals is that it gets a little dark in places, but this does help to re-hammer home the aesthetic that they are going for. The game also scales quite well, meaning if you want to scale the game back to minimum settings for your PC, it still looks the part. The audio for the game is absolutely gorgeous. The music doesn't feel repetitive and goes way harder than it needs to in places. The little ambient sounds from around on the ground also sound great. You can hear little individuals shouting from their stalls about things that they are selling, as well as the clicks and clacks of tools working the furnaces. Mechanically, Manor Lords does some things that are a little bit unique. As with any city builder, you'll start off by trying to get your base resources. You need wood, planks, firewood, stone, iron, as well as a myriad of other materials to keep your settlements growing. You need to harvest berries from the land. You need to chop down trees from the forests, which do grow back. The berries die in the winter, and animals can be completely eradicated if you overhunt. Hides need to be turned and tanned into leather, which can then be made into clothing. And individual houses can be specialized to grow specific crops in small quantities. As you start producing items in your city, you'll be asked to make a market. And this is where individual peasants can go from their main job, which they are assigned to by the player, to then the marketplace where they redistribute their food. This income can be taxed, which is where the game gets a little bit tricky. You have two income sources, one on the left and one on the right. The one on the left is your regional income, and the one on your right is your overall income. Essentially, you're not just controlling one city. In this video, that's all I have is for footage, but very quickly, once you get to the point where you can claim another region, well, that's where the conquest game kicks in, and you have the ability to start building a second town. Once the towns are up and running, they're pretty self-sufficient. You don't need to do too much to tweak them. Of course, food can come and go, and you will need to monitor them, but if the game starts to feel repetitive, it's probably because you need to start a second settlement. This then allows you to trade back and forth between the two settlements and pass resources back and forth between them. If you overtax any region, that region will get upset with you. But if they are being overly provided for in the form of a wide variety of food, clothing, and different types of items that they would like to acquire, things like shoes and alcohol, then they're more okay with paying higher taxes. While you'll still take a hit to your overall reputation, it won't be bad enough that they will outright leave. The tax money can be spent on a few things, upgrading your manor, which can give you new abilities, as well as hiring mercenaries. Although, if every other region has been taken over by the enemy power, well, then you won't be hiring any mercenaries today because they're all gone already. Trading has an interesting role to play in this game, as very early on you'll realize that probably your starting area sucks for farming, or there's no stone, or maybe you need some clay for rafters. Well, the result is you will be trading. You will be producing stuff that you have available to you, moving it to your trading depot, and then sticking a bunch of families on it. Oh, something else I should mention. The citizens aren't individuals, they're families. So a family of 5 is more efficient than a family of 2, meaning you want your houses to be big so that they can have lots of kids. But this is where Manor Lords gets interesting for a lot of people. Combat. Manor Lords has some light Total War-ish combat to it. Essentially, as you are building up your army, very early on you'll get a tooltip that's telling you that you are getting a shipment of weapons from the king. This is in the form of 20 shields and 20 spears. As you begin to level up your houses, you have the opportunity to specialize into artisans. If you specialize a family into artisans, then they can take over the job to produce more higher-end materials, but it takes them out of your overall workforce, meaning what was once a house that had a usable worker is now a factory making shoes, or shields, or weapons. This feels quite unique. Not something I've ever encountered in a city builder before, and a mechanic that I really, really like. And your military comes from the population of your city. So if it's a bigger sized city, then you'll have more people to use as soldiers. They equip themselves organically as you assign new squads in their houses. And then when raiders come or an enemy army is marching upon your city, well, it's time to rally the troops, get the men out of the houses, and get them in their weapons. The better equipped they are, the higher their chances of survival. The combat itself feels like a interesting take on Total War style combat. Of course, high ground gives advantage. If you have them sprinting the whole time, they'll get fatigued and won't fight as effectively. And if they break formation, they lose cohesion, which can cause them to panic. It's a pretty fun combat system, and the more I've been messing around with it, the more I've been enjoying it. Although, the current builds of the game have some really, really questionable pathing, especially when fighting in city streets, so maybe avoid that, but the bugginess of it we'll get to in a little bit. The combat is a means to an end. The Conquest overworld map is full of different regions that can be conquered to expand into extra cities, with an end goal of being able to take over all of them. These require favor. Favor is acquired from your church, which is also required to upgrade many buildings in your city. Favor is earned by either taking over small bandit camps or donating food to the church. Favor can then be spent to set a claim on one of these other areas. Once a claim has been set, then it's your army versus theirs, your city versus their population. Having access to these regions also gives you access to the mercenaries that are up for sale in those regions. And then you fight it out in the lands nearby, and then if you win, well, land is yours to do as you see fit as you build up a new claim on that land. Connect them together with roads and work as a bigger country with multiple cities. The conquest mechanics, I think, is where the game begins to feel quite underbaked in a lot of ways. There's a lot of things on the roadmap for this early access game that talk about the conquest mechanics and the overworld map. Things like being able to see other cities building on them instead of just mysterious armies walking in from the edge of the world. But as with any early access game and a video of this style, I should talk about how finished does it feel. Well, in a lot of ways, it's quite polished. It runs really well, it looks really pretty, and it plays good, at least the bits that are there. But as you start going through the tech tree, you'll realize that there are plenty of things that are locked behind walls, and whole menus that are strangely empty. The questions or the help screen really leaves something to be desired, and there's some oddities in wording in some places in the game, such as the game referring to linen as clothing and not informing you that you don't actually need to make the clothing. The people make it themselves and then take it to market. It's not super clear and just needs better tutorialization. Also in the unfinished department, the game only has one map currently, and there doesn't seem to be any new maps in the near future. However, the map is quite large, and because the layouts of the roads and the materials on the maps themselves appear to be somewhat random, there's quite a bit of variety here, and I'm certainly not bored having played it 5 or 6 times now. All in all, Manor Lords is an extremely solid baseline for what I think is going to be a pretty awesome game in the future. Right now, it's largely a game for enthusiasts, which trailers really well, which I think is both a positive and a negative. The positive is that, well, it got a lot of wish lists and it sold great. The negative is that I think a lot of people bought this game thinking it was something else, to the point where the developer even posted a massive post on the Steam developer blog about what the game is and what the game isn't, trying to quell some of the pre-hype questions about the game. The game launched really well, and the people who like it really like it. It's really great to see the indie city builder, or the survival city builder, go from being a genre that practically didn't exist to the success of Banished to then the buildup of games like this. While there are significantly more developed city builders out there, Manor Lords captures a feeling of historical accuracy so vividly, from the aesthetics to the crop rotation to the way the city's mechanics work themselves, the specialization of housing, the importing of livestock, and just the look and feel of the towns you are building. It's cozy, it's very enjoyable, and I really, really like the game. I can't wait to see it developed over the next few years, and I look forward to where it ends up in the end. Congratulations to Hooded Horse and developer Slavic Magic for one hell of a launch. You guys have really knocked it out of the park with this one. Thank you very much for watching this video. I realize it's not Dwarf Fortress, but I wanted to do something different. It's been a lot of tutorials over the past week. working on that Let's Play. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.